Category 4 Roslyn headed for the coast of Mexico. Landfall expected overnight tonight. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for October 23rd. Right now we have a very powerful hurricane in the eastern Pacific in the form of Roslyn, and we are declaring tropical storm status for 92B, located in the Bay of Bengal and headed towards the coast of India and Bangladesh. That's our 80th storm of the year so far, code orange. This is the Atlantic right now, and our team have gone with 30% chance for this area of interest. It's expected to continue westwards around a ridge in the central Atlantic and probably not develop, but still an interesting little feature. In the eastern Pacific, of course, a major situation unfolding with Roslyn and hurricane warnings for the coast of Jalisco, Nayarit and towards Sinaloa. With the storm expected to make landfall probably as a major hurricane, or maybe down to category 2 by then when it makes landfall to the northeast. In the western Pacific we've got two moderate chances, downgrade on 25W, remnants now according to our team update, 50% chance of regeneration, and still at 60% in the Philippine Sea that might take its time to organise. Indian Ocean now has this tropical storm 92B, so we now believe that this is a go situation underway, and we could be looking at a strong tropical storm landfall in Bangladesh near the Ganges River Delta in just a couple of days. Let's check the latest satellite imagery, and this is what the Atlantic is looking like right now, and you can see dry air dominating. The Atlantic area of interest there is pretty much near the center of the image. It's hard to get an actual center on that right now though, but it's towards the northeastern side of all of that disturbed weather, headed towards the Sargasso Sea. And here's the eastern Pacific, and quite unmistakably there's Hurricane Roslyn. The eye has become a lot more clouded over though in the last few hours, so suggestions that the storm may have begun weakening, but it's still only just going over that hill, and it's not ramping down, substantially weakening yet, although it is what we're expecting. We are expecting this storm to rapidly weaken at some point, due to increasing wind shear as the storm continues to push northwards. So basically, the further out to sea it remains for longer, and the higher the chance that the storm will be weaker by the time it reaches land. Of course, if it hits land in a shorter amount of time, there'll be less chance for the storm to weaken before it gets there. There's some visible imagery of the storm in the late frames of the day there, and you can see that the eye is still looking pretty decent when you look at that on visible, and we saw the infrared before where it was looking, it was struggling a little bit with the eye, but still very high convective cloud tops. The shape of the eye is still very much there. The storm isn't falling apart by any stretch. And here's another view from the infrared channels, showing once again on another view there, very high convection on the western side, but shear will have a bigger impact as the storm continues northwards as it heads towards the coast of Mexico. We do expect this situation to change very quickly. The storm is expected to rapidly accelerate off towards the northeast shortly, currently moving at 9 miles per hour, but it will probably at least double or triple that speed as it moves through into Mexico overnight. Western Pacific looks like this, and it's really a very crazy state. What's left of 25W still blowing up a bit of convection in the South China Sea, and a lot of disorganized weather in the lower latitudes of the Philippine Sea. Something is expected to form out of that eventually, but goodness knows where and when. Indian Ocean, you can quite clearly see the storm breaking away from that monsoonal trough to its south as it continues northwards through the Bay of Bengal, and massive convective tops blowing up out of that. Probably not strong winds, but certainly very heavy rain rates currently occurring inside that thing right now. And looking towards the southern hemisphere, there's a little bit of loose rotation south of Indonesia actually, but we've not seen anything on models. And looking towards the South Pacific, a few frontal systems blowing through, and we were eyeing that system on the eastern coast of Australia. You can just about see it there as well, just north of Brisbane, blowing up a little bit of convection, but won't become tropical, and I think the chance is up for that. Underneath Roslyn right now, temperatures pushing 29, maybe even one or two pockets of 30 degrees Celsius ahead of Roslyn right now. Gulf of Mexico cooling down gradually, but the Caribbean still staying very warm, pushing 30 degrees Celsius. Where that invest is heading in the Atlantic, it will go to colder temperatures pretty soon for that. So any thoughts that it would reach the US East Coast as a tropical storm, probably dashed. Indian Ocean, very warm sea surface temperatures ahead of 92B, 30 degrees plus, especially in the northeastern part of the Bay of Bengal, which is exactly where this storm is headed. And into the western Pacific there, the Philippine Sea, very warm waters as well, pushing 30 degrees, especially through the Philippine Islands. But in the South China Sea, where 25W is, only just about 27 degrees Celsius, waters are cooling in the northern part of that sub-basin. As you would expect at this time of year, of course. Anomalies, we've still got the La Nina in play. Roslyn over pretty average temperatures. Caribbean above average. Gulf of Mexico hit and miss. Most of the outer Atlantic there, higher temperatures. Western Pacific, Philippine Sea, generally a little bit above average. And the South China Sea, only a slight bit above average. Oceanic heat content is still pumping hot in the Atlantic there, in the Western Caribbean and in the central part. Late season storms could definitely take advantage of that. Eastern Pacific, there's only a few dregs left there off the coast of Mexico, but that's where Roslyn is, so it's probably taking full advantage of that, or has done. And in the Western Pacific, still very decent amounts of heat content in the Philippine Sea. Let's check what the GFS has to say then, and you almost missed it. It blinked and you missed it there. Quick landfall into Mexico from Roslyn, and then indications actually that it might enhance some severe weather activity over the central United States in a couple of days. There you see it again moving inland. It initialized it too weak. So it really isn't much use, to be honest, looking at this model run, although the only thing it probably could tell us about is wind shear. Our models are depicting wind shear starting to rise already. 15 knots I believe it currently is. Western Pacific, you can see what's left of 25W skirting down towards the southwest, and eventually this massive lumbering thing starts to appear in the Philippine Sea. And it does become a massive storm towards the end of that 5-day period with gale force winds. Doesn't quite close off that centre of circulation, but it looks like at the end of that 5-day period that it's about to. That's just one scenario. There's still some schools of thought that think it might actually be two separate systems that try to form in that 5-day period. Indian Ocean, this forms very quickly here, and there it goes. Large, broad system makes landfall very quickly. We're really looking at it happening probably tomorrow, making landfall in Bangladesh with strong tropical storm force winds, probably pushing hurricane force. Let's just get that landfall time, and it's around there. That is tomorrow evening. So that's Monday evening local time that we're expecting that landfall, and for it to contain possibly hurricane force winds and a very broad wind field. Here's the rainfall chart as that storm moves in as well, and some localized very high amounts of rain which could cause significant problems. Certainly along coastal areas in some regions, even in Myanmar, we could be looking at 6 inches of rain in that orange patch there further south, and that is around 150 millimeters. Inland over Bangladesh and into the very far eastern reaches of India, we could be looking at 6 inches there as well, and that small pocket near the landfall zone, 15 inches there in that highly elevated rain swath, and that of course is a very high amount of rain. That's nearly 400 millimeters, and when you watch that move through, it happens very quickly, so you'd be expecting extremely high rain rates in that. And that is what the biggest concerns are when we talk about flash flooding and landslides. Of course, it's a very flat area there, so I doubt there's going to be that much in terms of landslides, but storm surge could be a big issue too. Longer range, there's a little system up in the North Atlantic there that tries to develop, and I think it might develop into a broad cyclone. Is that tropical or not? Well, I'll let you be the judge of that. And at the very end of that 5 to 10 day loop, you can see down in the central Caribbean, probably a worst nightmare developing there. A storm in the low latitudes in the Caribbean Sea, just about to take full advantage of those very warm waters that still remain in that part of the world. Western Pacific in that same period, that big enormous system wrapping itself around, and eventually it gets up there and heaves northwards and northeastwards and becomes a Category 2 typhoon there and continues in that general vein. Right at the end of that as well, I think I saw another system forming into the South of China Sea, so potentially another homebrewed system there right towards the end of that loop, but it's hard to tell. That's all the serious stuff done and dusted. You can take a look at the Force 13 merch store by scanning that barcode at the top right. We have all of our usual products, including individual and full season animations, bespoke on request. Also, are still waiting for Hone t-shirt, well stocked still, and there's still a lot of time to collect yours. Well, the Silly Range presents this interesting hurricane, but it would be a very bad situation if this particular scenario happened. It blows up, sort of like Matthew there, but it doesn't end up like that because it starts to do a loop around Haiti as a significant hurricane there in the early weeks of November. So that would certainly be a major concern if something like that was to happen. Of course, these areas are very susceptible to serious hurricane damage and flooding, Haiti particularly. That would be a terrible situation if we saw that come to pass. There's that South China Sea storm in that long range there, first week of November. Tries to become a typhoon even, and then eventually dips to the west, southwest, and then down towards Vietnam. That other storm steamrolls towards the northeast. We can watch that one again, and we'll follow that big storm this time. Where does it end up? It turns post-tropical, enormous and very powerful there, possibly Category 3 force winds into Alaska and affecting some of the larger areas of Alaska, the more populated regions even, with tropical storm force winds, but that of course is extremely long range. And finally, in the southwest Indian Ocean, our first proper storm might be on its way, although this once again is day 10 to 16, and there is a hurricane equivalent storm, possibly getting to Category 2 status, moving southwest and headed towards possibly Rodrigues, and moves towards the south, eventually starting to recurve. Even a storm like that this early in the season is quite rare. Especially getting up to that kind of intensity. You'd more likely see that kind of thing in, say, mid to late December probably. Anyway, on this day in 2004 we had Typhoon Nok 10, certainly a very picturesque storm, peaking as a Category 3 on this day as it was continuing towards Taiwan. As you may have heard on some of our live coverage earlier on, it's got some pretty historic dates for the Eastern Pacific, and quite timely that we've got another hurricane headed that way when previous hurricanes affected the coast of Mexico on this day as well, including of course Patricia. Just thought I would mention that. Anyways, back to this year, and next up in the Atlantic Ocean, get the feeling that we're not quite done yet. The next name is Lisa. In the Eastern Pacific, next up is Seymour, and in the Central Pacific, our next name is still Hone. Looking towards the Westpac, next up is still Nalgi, and in the North Indian Ocean, we're still waiting for Sitrang. Even though we've got a tropical storm there, it's not yet been named by the Indian Meteorological Department. They have it as a depression, by the way. Should have mentioned that much earlier, but that's the next name, Sitrang. In the Southern Hemisphere, the next name in the Australian region is Darian, the Southwest Indian Ocean, Chiniso, and in the South Pacific, it's Harley. That's all from tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. We'll be back again tomorrow night.